You could end up in a mountain of debt for a variety of reasons. Sometimes, situations arise that can cause things to go out of hand, even though you've been responsible with your money, and sometimes it's because you've made bad financial decisions. Whatever the reason is, it's a problem that needs a quick solution. Sometimes, though, it's very difficult to pay off debt no matter what you do. In this case, some people may consider opting for bankruptcy instead, while others feel reluctant to do so because of all the bad rap bankruptcy gets. In fact, both attitudes aren't completely unjustified. To spare you the uncertainty and hesitation, in this video, we'll explain everything about the bankruptcy process and show you when it's a good option and when it definitely isn't. So let's jump right in. Welcome back to PST Finance. There are two kinds of bankruptcy that most individuals can apply for, Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. Chapter 7 bankruptcy wipes out all debt and allows you to start fresh. In exchange, though, you could lose a lot of valuable assets like your house. There are, of course, assets that you can keep, but this varies from state to state. Some often assume, for example, that they can't lose their cars, but this might not be true in some cases. This is why it's always best to first check with your lawyer, who will be able to tell you the details relevant to your own state and situation. Chapter 7 bankruptcy lasts on your credit report for 10 years from the date of filing. As for Chapter 13 bankruptcy, you won't lose any assets, which makes it a more appealing option to some. However, it has its downsides since it doesn't wipe out all debt. You will be required to work out a payment plan with your creditors to pay off part of the original amount of debt. The plan usually lasts 3 to 5 years. Chapter 13 bankruptcy stays on your credit report for several years from the filing date. We'll focus on Chapter 7 bankruptcy since it's the more drastic solution that many people opt for, but most of this guide will apply to Chapter 13 bankruptcy just as well. Given the threat of losing valuable assets and how bad bankruptcy can look on a credit report, some feel like they'd better stick to paying off debt instead. Alternatively, some people may look at it from a different angle and find the prospect of wiping all their debt out very appealing. It turns out that there's something to be said for each perspective. Ultimately, you should be well informed so you can make the best choice for your specific financial situation, and this is what today's video is all about. So first, let's talk about when you should not file for bankruptcy. It's common for some people to think that bankruptcy is always an available option. That is, they think it's always possible to opt out of any debt by filing for bankruptcy, as long as they're willing to do so. But this is far from true. When you file for bankruptcy, a judge reviews your request and evaluates your case. If the judge thinks your income is too high and that it's possible for you to pay off your debt normally, your bankruptcy case could be denied. Sometimes the court will consider you for Chapter 13 bankruptcy if your original request was for Chapter 7. Say, for example, that you're $30,000 in debt. If your annual income is around $60,000, then the debt you're required to pay off is not that high given your income. You only need careful budgeting and planning. A judge would likely deny your bankruptcy case in such a scenario. The same goes for cases where you have a lot of assets that can be liquidated. So even if your income is not very high, your case could be denied if you have valuable assets that can help you pay off your debt normally. This is why it's important to discuss your financial situation carefully with your lawyer. Your lawyer can't file a good bankruptcy petition if all the information you've given him doesn't make for a good case. It should also go without saying that omitting any important details regarding your financial situation would get your request denied and could potentially be considered a criminal offense. Setting aside court decisions, it's important to remember that even if your bankruptcy request will likely be accepted, bankruptcy might not be your best option. To see this, first consider the downsides of filing for bankruptcy. It's commonly assumed that the only downside is that bankruptcy deals a heavy blow to your credit score. It's certainly true that a bad credit score is a huge problem in its own right. You'd be unable to easily get loans, and the interest rates on anything would be very high. However, this isn't the only downside you should worry about. Bankruptcy will show up on any background check done on you by an employer, and that can make it very difficult to get a job. While federal, state, and local governments are required by law not to consider your bankruptcy when deciding whether to hire you, private employers retain the right to do so. As a result, many people have found themselves unable to get a well-paying job after filing for bankruptcy. This is particularly important when it comes to jobs in the finance sector or jobs that include a lot of planning and management of assets, for instance. So if you want to get a job in the private sector, you should think carefully before deciding to go bankrupt. Moreover, bankruptcy can make you an undesirable tenant. Landlords, too, can do a background check on you and may be reluctant to rent their property to you, worrying that you may not be able to meet your payment deadlines. Given all these downsides, you could feel crippled for the 7 to 10 years you will spend with bankruptcy on your record. Even worse, some credit bureaus may keep it on your record for an additional 6 to 7 years. So the natural thing to do is try to pay off your debt as effectively as possible, keeping bankruptcy as a last resort. This certainly doesn't mean that bankruptcy is never a good option. But before we talk about when you should go for it, here are a few things you can do to deal with debt that you may not know about. Always negotiate with your creditors. The amount of debt you owe is not set in stone. Most creditors, like banks and hospitals, will be willing to work out a payment plan with you or reduce the amount you're required to pay if you tell them you can't afford to pay off your current debt. The reason for this is simple. Creditors don't want to go through the expensive and time-consuming process of forcing you to pay, and they certainly know that the debt would be wiped out if you went for bankruptcy. Similarly, you should negotiate with debt collection agencies. They're also often willing to settle for a much smaller amount of money. Finally, you should have a well-thought-out plan to pay off debt. Luckily, you don't have to come up with a plan yourself. Check out our video on debt consolidation and the avalanche and snowball methods. You'd be surprised how much time and money these plans can save you. Never try to pay off your debt randomly. With that said, your debt could still be very high. If you don't see how with your current income you could pay off your debt anytime soon, then maybe bankruptcy is your best option at the end of the day. After all, bankruptcy isn't the only part of your record that can seriously cripple you. Having a lot of defaulted debt on your record will also seriously tank your credit score, and the effects can last for a very long time. For example, if you default on a debt, it will most likely be handled by a debt collection agency, and you will get a collection account on your credit report. This account won't be removed before you either pay or wait until 7 years have passed. And sometimes, even if you pay, the account could be marked by the collection agency as paid as agreed, in which case the account will stay on your record forever. This is not to mention the emotional stress that could result from dealing with creditors and debt collectors or living on a very tight budget for years. In the case of unmanageable debt, then it's probably better to file for bankruptcy, since struggling to pay off debt can have the same negative impact as bankruptcy on your financial situation and mental health. The overall lesson here is that bankruptcy isn't inherently better or worse than paying off debt. The right question to ask isn't, do I qualify for bankruptcy? Or how do I pay off debt without filing for bankruptcy? It's, given my current financial situation, which option would be best for my financial and mental well-being over the next few years? Considering the downsides of debt and bankruptcy, the ultimate choice is yours. In the end, if you decide to file for bankruptcy, you should consult a lawyer to know how likely you are to qualify for it and what assets you might lose. Lawyers usually do initial bankruptcy consultations for free. Moving forward, it's important to realize that bankruptcy isn't the final solution to your financial problems. If you don't change your spending habits, you could end up in a situation that forces you to go bankrupt once again. And with careful budgeting and planning, you will be able to rebuild your credit score. That's all for today. What do you think about this guide? Are there any tips you would like to add? Make sure to let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. See you in the next video.